Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let us talk metal. Yeah, let's do that. Hope everyone is doing well today. Today, we're talking about, you guessed it, new wave of British heavy metal. Because, well, it's a day that ends in the letter Y, and I'm making a video, so the odds were pretty good we'd end up on this topic if you had to make a bet. Got three things picked out today to show you. We'll play some clips, talk about the bands just a bit, and see where we end up. This first one is one of the earliest records I heard when I got interested in new wave of British heavy metal, and it is still one of the absolute classics in my opinion. We're starting off, yes, with one of the top ones. The band is called Gaskin, and the song on the single is called I'm No Fool. This one came out in 1981, and we'll start off right away with a clip of I'm No Fool from Gaskin. All right, Gaskin, getting absolutely ripping one out there with I'm No Fool. This single came out 1981 on Rondelet Records. Rondelet had a couple of new wave of British heavy metal bands in their stable, Gaskin being one, Witchfind being the other notable one. I think the label had more of a footprint in the punk music scene, so they didn't bring a lot of metal bands on board that I'm aware of anyway. The single came out in support of the band's first full-length album, also on Rondelet. It was called End of the World. It has a nice gatefold cover, and it's a very solid album. This is a great example to me of the classic new wave of British heavy metal sound. You know, a lot of people sometimes kind of debate back and forth. Was new wave of British heavy metal a sound or a scene? And you know, it's kind of both, actually. I don't think this is a situation where it has to be one or the other. This is a band that was definitely on the scene. These were the, new, younger, hungrier bands. They had the do-it-yourself ethos of the punk movement that had been very successful in the UK. But they were also tired of, the 20-minute guitar solo, orchestral symphony level stuff that, bands like Deep Purple and ELP had been doing throughout the 70s. They wanted something shorter, faster, more of a kick in the teeth, more like what Judas Priest had been building towards. So yeah, Gaskin to me, this is the definition of new wave of British heavy metal. Both the sound, the scene, perfect. Great vocalist, love the dude's voice. Very good songwriting, put together well, nice guitar work, even, cool little drum fill at one point. Really, what more could you ask for out of it? The flip side, Sweet Dreammaker, also a good track. I just did not cue that one up to play tonight. The band did make a second album as well, and it came out just a year later in 1982. That one's called No Way Out. I haven't heard the album in a long time. I did get it at one point, and remember just being immensely disappointed with it, that it didn't quite sound like the same band. The songs were not quite as sharp or as interesting. It felt kind of just run of the mill. It's not that it was a horrible album. It wasn't incompetent. It wasn't that they had, turned, Hairspray or anything like that. It just felt like, kind of a boring album. And if there's one thing that you never want heavy metal to be, it's boring. Heavy metal is supposed to be the exact opposite of boring. It's supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be fun and interesting. So when you listen to it, I was just like, well, that's a thing. That's kind of a death sentence. That album also had a single that came out in support of it, but it was for Moni Moni. We think we know where this is going, right? Yeah, it's a cover of the old Tommy James and the Shondells song. I don't mind that song, but why would you release a single when the A side is a cover song? Then when you're trying to get your second album to break, boy, that right there kind of tells you how things were going wrong on the second Gaskin album. But the first one is a gem. The single is great. The little thing, by the way, the version of I'm No Fool on the single is not the same as the version on the LP. And I do think the single version is a little bit better. It's played at a slightly different tempo. It's the kind of thing you might not notice at first. I was used to the version on the single. I heard this first, and I believe I heard this on the Lars Ulrich 79 Revisited New Wave of British Heavy Metal compilation. So hearing that, loved the song, still do to this day. But then when you hear it on the album, if you're really familiar with the single version, you'll hear it and be like, something's slightly not off, but something is different here. So, it is a re-recording of the track. It's still pretty good. I think the single version really nails it, though. So, Gaskin, there's been some compilation material put out over the years so that you can check out their material. They did an EP in 2012 called The Contract, and they did a full-length album also in 2012 called Edge of Madness. I vaguely remember this coming out. I never investigated, so I don't know what it sounds like. If you do know what it sounds like, by all means, please leave a comment below. Let me know. I'm always very gun-shy when it comes to these getting the band back together kind of projects, especially when it's been like 30 years later. I've been burned on that many times. And granted, there's sometimes it works out extremely well when the band comes back and it's like they never left and they do a great album. So I do miss out sometimes. If Gaskin is one of those cases and I really need to hear that 2012 album, let me know about it in the comments down below and I'll go check it out. All right. But yeah, that's been about it from the Gaskin camp. Excellent band. The single and the album have never been, that expensive or hard to track down. The single is a little bit scarce, but these are not, high dollar holy grail kind of items that you're going to have to, pension your children's futures or anything like that to try to obtain a copy. They're also records that I'll admit sometimes I kind of forget about, since Gaskin was one of the first new wave of British heavy metal bands I latched onto when I heard that 79 Revisited compilation. I tracked this down pretty fast and got it, listened to it a ton, liked it, put it on the shelf, dusted off from time to time. I sometimes forget to talk about Gaskin simply because, to me, my brain defaults to thinking, oh, it's a given that everybody knows who Gaskin is. That's a very common new wave of British heavy metal band. I don't need to talk about that. Nobody wants to hear me talk about Gaskin. Everybody knows Gaskin. And then sometimes I have to stop and do a little course correction and remind myself that, well, most people have no idea who Gaskin is. Why aren't you talking about it? So tonight I am. All right, now let's talk about another band that probably nobody really has heard of. This one is relatively obscure, but is one that I kind of dig, and we'll see if you dig it as well. This is a new wave of British heavy metal band called Storyteller. Sort of an odd name. They made this one 7-inch single. It's called Mystery Girl, and I'll play a little bit of both sides of this one. This is not one you come across very often, so we'll check out both tracks. May have to skip forward a little bit in at least one of these because some sections kind of, take a while to work through, but we'll begin with the A-side, Mystery Girl from Storyteller. right, so that is the A side called Mystery Girl. Not a bad song. It doesn't move at a very fast pace, but it's got a good guitar tone. I like the vocalist, and it develops a decent atmosphere as it moves through the song. So this is one that, while it's not all guns blazing, uh, I am a bit of a sucker for these new wave of British heavy metal songs that have a little bit of a kind of moody, slightly darker atmosphere to it. And yeah, Mystery Girl works for me. Let's also check out the flip side, which is called Easy Living. All right, so there's the flip side, Easy Living, not a Uriah Heep cover. That song's excellent too, but yeah, this one obviously a little bit more of a Kraken affair than the A-side Mystery Girl. Again, nice guitar crunch to it. I like both songs on it quite a bit. May not be everyone's cup of tea. It's a little bit of a different release than other issues too. It's got actually a full color picture sleeve. It's not just a black and white sleeve. Obviously, very easy to spot image, with the red head in the red dress with the red logo and the red purse. Very color coordinated for a new wave of British heavy metal band. I probably noticed when I was showing this off that my copy has a vinyl tap stamp on the paper inner sleeve. Vinyl Tap's a big mail order place in the UK. The last time I checked, they were still around. They were a big deal back in the 90s. I never ordered a ton of stuff from Vinyl Tap. I was on their list. I would get, mailers and updates from them from time to time. Their prices were always pretty steep, was the bottom line. I couldn't afford to buy a lot of their stuff, but they ended up, with some copies of the Storyteller 7-inch and had it for what I thought was a reasonable price. So I picked it up from them. I don't even remember how long ago it was. I got one or two random compilation albums from them too, but that was about it. They always had cool stuff, but it was always a little out of my price range. Anyway, there's not much more to say about Storyteller, sadly. They had the single. It came out in 1985, a little bit late as a new wave of British heavy metal entry. Some people are going to throw a red card, sticking to the red, and say, nope, can't be new wave of British heavy metal that late. I think it definitely still fits with the movement. You still had a few bands operating. Yes, if you want to cut the scene off a little earlier than that in time, that's fine. I don't care. Myself, I will usually let bands eke into the category up through 1986. 86 is about the end for me. There's only one record from 87 I feel bad leaving out, but you do eventually have to draw a line somewhere. But yeah, Storyteller, cool single. Still a relatively rare single. It turns up from time to time. It usually has a 3-figure asking price. I don't know how to feel about that. I did not pay that much for my copy at all. But again, I bought my copy eons ago when dinosaurs still stalked the earth. The Storyteller single is rare. On the other hand, it's never been considered like a holy grail collectible. It's not one of those must-have records from the scene. So it never feels like there's really much competition for it. If you see a copy for something like $75 on Discogs or a buy it now on eBay and you want it, buy it. I think that's a reasonable enough price for it. But if it's an auction and it's starting at like $75 or something, I would say maybe wait and see where it goes. It might be one of those cases where nobody's going to bid on it, and you could contact the seller and offer them like $50 or something less for it. And maybe they take it, maybe they don't. It's up to them. But you're not going to see a lot of bidding wars erupt over the Storyteller record. It's again, I think it's a little too late in time. The fact that it has a colorful picture sleeve, that's kind of bright, it doesn't necessarily look metal enough for some people, and, the songs, while I like them, no, neither of them are, raging infernos of Satan's hell fury. It's not that kind of music. Good stuff, but the pieces here with this album, or single rather, they don't add up to the point where you're going to have a record that you should have to pay an awful lot of money for. If you're paying a lot, it's just based on scarcity. And usually in those cases, you can negotiate and maybe get a little better deal. So enough record buying tips. Let's get back. We got one last thing to check out. This last one is, let's see. Yeah, we're going with this one tonight. Apocalypse. They had a 7-inch single with the songs called Chosen Few and Storm Child on it. And yes, this is the front of the picture sleeve. As it is, we'll take a closer look at it in a minute. We'll play clips both of these tracks. This is another one you don't encounter much. Like the Storyteller, this doesn't show up on a lot of compilation or best of things later on either. It's always kind of gotten a bit overlooked. So let's begin with a clip of Storm Child. So yeah, Storm Child, another one that's going for more of that, mid-pace, but, a little, darker, moodier kind of sound to it. Good track. I like it. Let's also check out a little bit of the flip side, which is called Chosen Few. And so there is Chosen Few, getting downright doomy on the flip side. There are some passages in that song that get a little bit more up-tempo. But yeah, this is a band that's doing something kind of unusual in new wave of British heavy metal circles. They're focusing on kind of the slow, dreary, doomy-tinged vibe more. I think their vocalist is really well suited to that. He's got a voice that works and carries very well, has that kind of, sadness to it. Works very, very nicely. Doomy stuff was not popular in the new wave of British heavy metal. Now, I know, yes, everyone's going to say, but Alan, what about Witchfinder General and Pagan Altar? Like, okay. Now name the third band. Go ahead, I'm waiting. Yeah, name another one. And things to remember too, Pagan Altar, they never even got to release anything during the actual new wave of British heavy metal movement. Their material was recorded back then, but was just left on cassettes until it got bootlegged much, much later. Witchfinder General did a couple of albums and EP and stuff, but they didn't ever really break through. They didn't play live a lot. they really weren't considered to be a very serious band at the time. They had a little bit too much of a Sabbath throwback thing. And yes, the silly record covers didn't help in that regard whatsoever. Slower, doomy, Sabbathy stuff, that again, that was Grandpa's heavy metal from 10 years earlier. Ozzy was long gone from Black Sabbath. He was doing much more, fancy stuff with Randy Rhoads by this point. Black Sabbath themselves were doing albums more like, Mob Rules. You're not as interested in the dinosaur rock when this stuff was coming out. So not a lot of bands operating in that same vein as Apocalypse, but I like the style and I like both those songs quite a bit. The single is a rare one. It's not one that turns up very often at all. The picture sleeve, yeah, is this weird thing that's, single-sided and just has a logo and the lyrics to both songs, which is kind of odd. Very few 7-inch singles from the new wave of British heavy metal ever put the lyrics anywhere. Yeah, it doesn't even have a full backside to it. But, so yeah, can be a tough single to find, can be a relatively expensive single to find. I got it a long time ago and I'm glad I did. The band did get some other stuff out. They switched their name to Omega and several years later would release this excellent album called The Prophet. Same vocalist. In fact, I was going to check, but I'm thinking one of the two songs from the single is on the album here. If I can double check. Let's see. We've got The Dark, Shadows of the Past, The Prophet, Yesterday's Children, Drive Me Alone, Day Chipper, and The Child. No, okay, my mistake. You don't get Storm Child or Chosen Few on here, but musically this is very similar. It's very atmospheric, sticks a bit more to the slower styles, and just has a really cool atmosphere to it overall. Not something many bands were doing in that day, so I like it when I stumble across one that was operating in that slightly different style. All right, so that is going to wrap it up for tonight's New Wave of British Heavy Metal installment. We've had Apocalypse, we've had Storyteller, and we've had Gaskin. So now it's time to talk metal in the comments down below. What do you think of these three entries? Is Gaskin one of those bands you've been very familiar with, or is this the first time you've ever heard the name? Let me know, because again, my brain tends to think it's a really, really commonly well-known band, and I think my brain is just wrong about that. Storyteller, if you saw that Storyteller sleeve in a box at a record fair or a store, would it even occur to you this is heavy metal and has new wave of British heavy metal connections? Maybe not, but yeah, it's one that's personally I think it's worth checking out. And Apocalypse, do you like that kind of doomy style to your new wave of British heavy metal? Or do you prefer the stuff that's more in the Gaskin mold? Nothing wrong with that either. I'm No Fool is an absolute cracker of a song. All right, that will do it for this installment of Let's Talk Metal. Everybody take care, and as always, keep banging your heads.